She walked into the shop every day with a cast on her wrist, her head down, and grease on her hands. Nobody asked how it happened, but one quiet man in the corner noticed, and what he uncovered in the next 72 hours would bring the FBI crashing through those garage doors. What was really happening inside Iron Ridge Auto? Engines never lied. That was what Lara Connor always told herself. A motor might sputter, groan, or even fall silent, but it never pretended. You opened it up, found the truth inside, and fixed it. People weren't like that. People lied. People covered things up. That was why Lara felt more at home hunched over an engine block than in any conversation. At 25, with oil stains on her knuckles and her wrist wrapped in a stiff white cast, she had learned that silence was the safest armor. The cast drew eyes, of course. Customers noticed it when she handed them receipts or tightened bolts with awkward precision using her left hand. The other mechanics joked about it in half-hearted ways. "Careful, Lara, don't break the other one," but never asked how it happened. Everyone in Iron Ridge Auto had learned not to poke too deep, especially when Chuck Sanders, the foreman, was in earshot. Chuck had a voice that filled the entire shop, sharp and grating as a wrench dragged over concrete. He barked orders like they were insults, pacing the garage floor with his clipboard like a drill sergeant who never actually fought a battle. "Connor, you call that aligned? My kid could do straighter work with a crayon." His laugh scraped through the shop, bouncing off the metal walls like a drill hitting steel. The younger mechanics forced nervous chuckles to follow along. Lara said nothing. She tightened her jaw, adjusted the bolt again, and swallowed the fire that burned in her chest. Biting her tongue had become the only shield she still trusted. But not everyone was fooled. In the corner of the shop, tucked behind the waiting room's smudged glass window, sat an older man who seemed to have nowhere better to be. Day after day, Bill Tanner appeared with the morning crowd, ordered burnt coffee from the vending machine, and planted himself in the same cracked vinyl chair. He'd pretend to skim a newspaper or thumb through an old paperback, but his eyes missed little. He watched the rhythm of the garage, the way Chuck strutted, the way the younger techs flinched, and the way Lara cradled her right wrist as if protecting more than bone. No one paid him much attention. Customers thought he was just another retiree with nothing to do. The crew figured he was lonely and liked the smell of grease. Only Lara noticed the steadiness of his gaze, and even then, she chalked it up to curiosity. She didn't know that Bill Tanner owned the very floor she worked on. Lara's life had narrowed to simple rituals. Unlock the shop, pull on coveralls, breathe in the smell of oil and steel. She told herself she didn't care about Chuck's words, but every jab chipped away at something inside her. And when customers turned skeptical eyes toward her, "You sure you know what you're doing, sweetheart?" It wasn't Chuck's insults that stung most, but the way silence followed. None of the other mechanics defended her. They avoided eye contact, fiddled with their own projects, pretending not to notice. What none of them knew was that her cast wasn't from a fall or an accident with a wrench. A few weeks earlier, she'd stayed late to close up. Chuck thought she'd gone home. She hadn't. She'd found the ledger, a battered notebook hidden under a stack of parts receipts, filled with numbers that didn't add up, parts that never arrived, orders that didn't match. She'd stared at the names and codes, confused at first, then realizing this wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was theft. Chuck had caught her. His rage was instant, terrifying. One shove sent her against the workbench, pain exploding through her wrist as the bone snapped. "You didn't see anything," he hissed. His face twisted with a kind of desperation she hadn't seen before. "Say one word, and you'll regret more than a broken arm." She had nodded, tears blurring her vision, and swore she wouldn't. The next morning, she walked in with her wrist wrapped in plaster, muttering about a fall. Chuck laughed louder than anyone, and the lie stuck. Now, weeks later, the shop lived on in uneasy rhythm. Chuck raged, Lara endured, and everyone else pretended not to notice. But Bill Tanner noticed. From his corner seat, Bill watched Chuck more than he read his paper. He'd seen men like him before. The bully who masked fear with bluster, the liar who tried to outrun his own mistakes. But Bill also saw Lara, The way she kept showing up, cast and all, never once letting Chuck push her out. There was steel in her, buried under quiet obedience. He could see it every time she squared her shoulders, every time she finished a job no one else wanted, every time she refused to give Chuck the satisfaction of quitting. One cold Wednesday morning, Lara was hunched over a carburetor, sweat sliding down her temple despite the draft in the shop. Chuck sauntered over, leaning too close, clipboard in hand. "Don't screw this one up, Connor. Last thing we need is another comeback special with your name on it." His voice dripped sarcasm. The younger mechanics chuckled, glancing nervously toward her. Lara didn't look up. She steadied the part, tightened the last screw, and muttered, "It's done." Chuck sneered. "Done wrong, you mean?" That was when Bill shifted in his chair, closing his newspaper with deliberate slowness. For a heartbeat, his eyes locked with Lara's through the glass. He gave the smallest of nods. Not pity, not sympathy, but recognition. Someone saw her. Someone knew. Lara looked away quickly, pulse hammering. Weeks of dull pain and silence had weighed her down, but now, a spark of defiance broke through, sharp enough to make her catch her breath. A question, sharp and terrifying. What if I wasn't as alone as I thought? And though she didn't know it yet, that quiet acknowledgement would be the first crack in Chuck Sanders' armor, the first step toward a storm that would shatter Iron Ridge Auto wide open. Chuck Sanders carried himself like a man in control, but control was the one thing slipping from his hands. He barked orders, cursed at apprentices, and leaned on his clipboard as though the paper held authority. But when he was alone, when the garage emptied out and the fluorescent hum of the lights was the only witness, he stared at the ledger with a sick twist in his stomach. The numbers weren't just off. They were a countdown. Years earlier, when his brother's towing business spiraled into bankruptcy, Chuck had tried to save it with money he didn't have. He borrowed from the wrong men, made promises he couldn't keep. Gambling filled the cracks, first in backroom poker games, then at casinos 2 states away. He convinced himself that one good hand would turn it all around. But one good hand never came. What did come were threats, sharp, whispered promises of what would happen if he didn't make good. The part smuggling scheme had been the only way out. Strip a little here, reroute a shipment there, sell the extras through black market channels. At first, it was small, barely noticeable, but debts piled higher than he could pay. And the men who leaned on him didn't deal in extensions. Now they wanted more, and faster. Late one night, Chuck parked his rusted Chevy by the chain-link fence behind the shop. A dark sedan rolled up, headlights slicing the fog. A man in a leather jacket stepped out, face shadowed by the brim of his cap. "You're behind," he said simply. No threats, no shouting, just the kind of cold certainty that froze Chuck's blood. "I'll have the next load ready," Chuck stammered. "Couple of engines, maybe a transmission." "Don't tell me maybe." The man leaned closer. "You don't deliver, you don't walk." Chuck nodded, throat tight, sweat slicking the back of his neck. When the sedan pulled away, taillights fading, he slammed his fist against the steering wheel. His life was a truck with failing brakes, skidding toward a wall he couldn't miss, and Lara Connor was the loose bolt that might send the whole rig crashing sooner. Meanwhile, Lara tried to hold her days together with routine. She arrived before the others, forcing down the bitter shop coffee while burying herself in work with her left hand while her right throbbed inside its cast. But the walls of the shop were closing in. Chuck's insults had sharpened since she returned. He never touched her again, but his voice cut deeper than fists. Constant reminders that she was slower, clumsier, less valuable. The others followed his lead, laughing nervously or staying silent. There was one exception. Miguel Alvarez, her closest friend from trade school, stopped by one afternoon with his toolbox slung over his shoulder. He'd taken a job at a different shop across town, one with brighter lighting and better pay. He hadn't forgotten her, though. When he saw the cast, his jaw tightened. "You're still here," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "Where else would I be?" Lara replied, eyes on the carburetor she was cleaning. "Anywhere but here. You don't deserve this." Lara wanted to tell him about the ledger, about the night her wrist snapped under Chuck's hand, but the memory still burned like a fresh bruise, and the words refused to leave her throat. She shook her head. "It's my place, Miguel. My dad brought me here when I was 12. He said one day I'd be running my own garage. If I walk away now, I'm letting Chuck win. I can't." Miguel sighed, frustration pulling at his features. "Then at least watch your back. Guys like him, he doesn't stop until someone makes him." Lara gave a small, humorless laugh. "Who's going to stop him? Everyone's too scared." She didn't notice Bill Tanner listening from the waiting room, the corner of his newspaper slipping lower as he caught every word. Bill had been quiet for weeks, blending into the background like worn furniture. But inside, his instincts stirred. He had seen men like Chuck in the Marines, loud, arrogant, dangerous not because they were strong but because they were cornered. And Lara, she reminded him of recruits who carried more weight than anyone realized, the kind who kept going even when the load should have broken them. Every day, Bill scribbled small notes in a pocket journal. License plates of trucks that came and went at odd hours. Serial numbers from invoices left out on counters. The names of suppliers that didn't match with the ones he remembered signing off years earlier. Because Iron Ridge Auto was his. Not on paper anymore, at least not openly. Years before, when his business partners sold him out in a shady corporate merger, he'd sworn never again to lead from the front. Better to fade into the background, let others wear the title of manager while he watched from the shadows. He thought he could live that way, detached, invisible. But Lara's quiet endurance was dragging him back into the fight. Chuck, meanwhile, grew more erratic. He snapped at apprentices for misplacing tools, kicked a bucket across the floor when an order came late, muttered curses under his breath when he thought no one was listening. One evening, after most of the crew had left, Lara stayed behind to finish balancing an engine. Chuck loomed in the doorway, his silhouette jagged in the fluorescent light. "You think I don't notice you watching me?" he said, voice low and sharp. Lara froze, wrench in hand. "You keep your nose in your work, Connor. You start poking where it doesn't belong again, and that cast will be the least of your problems." Her chest tightened, but she didn't flinch. She turned back to the engine, refusing to give him the satisfaction of fear. Chuck lingered a moment longer, then stalked out, the slam of the office door rattling the walls. From across the lot, in the darkened waiting room, Bill Tanner had seen the exchange through the glass. His jaw tightened. Enough was enough. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through old contacts, and tapped a name he hadn't called in years. When the voice answered, Bill said only, "It's Tanner. I've got something rotten at Iron Ridge. I need your eyes on some shipment logs." After decades of silence, Bill wasn't just watching anymore. He was stepping back into the game. The next morning, Iron Ridge Auto buzzed with the familiar racket of air compressors and metal striking metal. But for Bill Tanner, sitting quietly in his usual chair, the noise was only a backdrop. His mind was elsewhere, on the late-night phone call that had pulled him out of retirement and back into a world he thought he'd left behind. His contact, Special Agent Marcy Holt, hadn't been surprised to hear from him. She owed him a favor from years ago, when his careful testimony in a messy corruption trial kept her career from collapsing. "Send me everything," she had told him. "Serial numbers, shipment invoices, anything that smells wrong." Bill had done just that. Now he waited, sipping stale coffee, watching the shop with the patience of a man who had learned that truth always surfaced, given time. Chuck Sanders, meanwhile, felt that time closing in. He had delivered just enough to keep his debtors at bay, but their voices still rang in his ears. Faster, bigger, or else. He paced the garage like a caged wolf, snapping at apprentices for misplacing sockets and growling when deliveries lagged. His eyes darted more than usual, catching shadows where there were none. Lara noticed. She had always noticed. His fury was louder now, sharper, but beneath it she sensed something else. A frantic edge, as if Chuck were running out of road. Still, she kept her head down, focusing on the job in front of her. It was safer that way, until the evening Miguel stopped by again. He leaned against the open bay door, grease on his hands from his own shop across town. "You're walking a tightrope, Lara," he said quietly. She didn't look up. I've been walking it for weeks. Miguel shook his head. No, this is different. I've been hearing things. Late-night trucks leaving this place half-loaded. Guys at the salvage yard saying parts show up with Iron Ridge stamps but no paperwork. That's not bad luck. It's theft. Lara's wrench stilled. She thought of the ledger the night Chuck broke her wrist. She wanted to tell Miguel everything, but fear clamped her throat shut. Instead, she whispered, "Don't get involved. It's not safe." Miguel studied her, saw the shadows behind her eyes, and pressed a slip of paper into her good hand. "My number. Day or night. If it gets worse, call me." Bill, watching from behind the waiting room glass, had caught enough of their conversation to confirm what he already knew. Lara wasn't blind to Chuck's schemes. She was surviving them. And survival had its limits. That night, after the shop emptied, Bill sat at his kitchen table with shipment logs spread across the wood. He had pulled them quietly, copies of invoices no one had bothered to lock away. Line after line showed discrepancies. Parts logged as delivered never appeared in the shop. Others rerouted through warehouses that didn't exist. He matched them against federal procurement records Marcy had sent over. The patterns were clear. Iron Ridge Auto wasn't just a neighborhood shop anymore. It had become a hole in the federal supply chain, bleeding engines and transmissions meant for military and police vehicles, some replaced with junk, others disappearing without a trace. Someone was profiting, and Chuck Sanders was in deep. Bill closed the file, his jaw tight. He had hoped this was small, a desperate man stealing scraps to cover his debts. But this was larger, uglier. And Lara Connor, stubborn and loyal, was caught in the middle. 2 days later, as rain hammered the metal roof, Chuck's paranoia boiled over. He cornered Lara near the tool racks, his face inches from hers. "You've been talking," he hissed. She blinked, startled. "What are you? Don't play dumb. You and your little boyfriend from across town. You think I don't see you whispering?" His eyes burned with a mixture of rage and fear. Lara's casted wrist trembled against her side. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said, voice quiet but steady. Chuck's hand slammed against the rack, rattling wrenches. "You owe me silence. If I go down, you go with me." His words landed like a wrench to the ribs, sharp and breath-stealing. She wanted to shout back, to call his bluff, but the memory of his fist and the crack of her bone still lived in her. So she turned away, gripping her tool hard enough that her knuckles blanched. Unseen by either of them, Bill rose from his chair in the waiting room and stepped outside, the newspaper left behind on the seat. He finally crossed the threshold, leaving the safety of the waiting room for the grit of the shop floor. The crew glanced up, surprised to see the old man in the grease-stained garage. Bill ignored their stares, his eyes fixed on Lara and Chuck. "You should head home, miss," he said, his voice calm but firm, directed at Lara. "You've done enough for today." Chuck sneered. "And who the hell are you?" Bill's gaze didn't waver. "Someone who's been watching long enough." For a tense moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the patter of rain. Then Lara wiped her hands on a rag, eyes wide but grateful, and slipped past both men without another word. Chuck glared after her, then turned on Bill. "Stay out of my business, old man." Bill didn't respond. He simply tucked his journal into his jacket and walked away, leaving Chuck fuming in the center of the bay. That night, Bill sent Marcy the final set of documents, evidence of missing shipments tied to federal contracts. Her reply was swift. "We're moving. Be ready." Iron Ridge Auto slept under the rain, but Bill knew the storm gathering outside would soon break through its doors. And when it did, the lies, the debts, and the fear that had ruled the shop would come crashing down. The morning the storm broke, Iron Ridge Auto smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and old coffee. Mechanics moved sluggishly, rubbing sleep from their eyes, unaware that the world around them was about to change. Lara Connor tightened the strap on her coveralls with her good hand and forced herself into another day, her wrist still trapped in plaster. Her resolve felt hammered into shape on the anvil of every insult she'd swallowed. She had survived Chuck Sanders' wrath, but survival had begun to feel like surrender. Something had to give. Chuck, on the other hand, was unraveling. He had barely slept, the weight of his debts grinding into his chest like a vice. Dark circles carved his eyes. His voice pitched higher than usual as he barked orders. Move faster. Double-check every order form. And keep those damn doors closed. His paranoia bled into every corner of the shop. Lara glanced toward the waiting room. Bill Tanner wasn't in his usual chair. For weeks, his steady presence had been a quiet comfort, an unspoken reminder that someone was watching. Today, the seat was empty. A knot formed in her stomach. Then, just after 10 a.m., the sound hit. A chorus of engines pulling up outside. Black SUVs and unmarked vans filled the lot, doors swinging open in unison. Federal agents poured out, windbreakers stamped with bold yellow letters. FBI. The garage froze. A wrench hit the floor with a metallic crack. The younger mechanics froze, eyes wide as agents streamed through the open bay doors. Weapons holstered but visible, voices sharp and commanding. Nobody move. Hands where we can see them. Chuck went pale. His clipboard slipped from his hands, papers scattering like frightened birds. This is a mistake, he stammered, backing toward the office. Two agents intercepted him, pinning his arms before he reached the door. Charles Sanders, you are under arrest for fraud, theft of government property, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Cold steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. The crew erupted in shocked whispers. Some stared in disbelief. Others exchanged guilty looks, as if their silence had made them accomplices. Lara stood frozen, her heart hammering, torn between fear and vindication. And then she saw him. Bill Tanner stepped through the doorway behind the agents, no longer the quiet old man with a newspaper, but a figure of authority, his shoulders squared, his eyes unflinching. He walked straight past the stunned mechanics and stopped beside Lara. Her mouth parted, but no words came. He gave a small nod. It's over. Confusion rippled through the shop. Wait, one of the younger mechanics whispered. He owns this place? Bill turned, his voice steady but carrying weight. My name is William Tanner. I founded Iron Ridge Auto 20 years ago. I've been here every day watching because I learned the hard way that you can't know the truth about people from behind an office door. I stayed silent too long, but silence ends today. Gasps swept the room. Lara felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from the sudden release of tension she had carried for weeks. The truth was out. Some mechanics lowered their heads, shame etched across their faces. They had let Lara stand alone, and the weight of that silence clung to the shop heavier than the stench of oil and exhaust. Agents swarmed the office, hauling out boxes of forged invoices, falsified ledgers, and crates of mislabeled parts. One agent emerged with the very notebook Lara had stumbled upon, the one that had cost her a broken wrist. She swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in her eyes. An FBI supervisor approached her directly. Miss Connor, we've reviewed witness statements. You're cleared of any suspicion. Your courage in continuing to work under those conditions speaks louder than you realize. Lara managed a quiet, "Thank you." Her voice trembled, but it was the tremble of release, not fear. Chuck was led past her, wrists bound, fury twisting his face. "This isn't over," he snarled, though the agents shoved him toward the waiting van. Lara's stare held steady, unblinking. Chuck faltered first, his fury shrinking into silence. That afternoon, as the agents packed up evidence and the crew lingered in stunned silence, Bill gathered the employees. His presence was no longer shadowed, no longer hidden. "This shop isn't closing," he told them firmly. "It's being rebuilt, on honesty and integrity, and on the backs of people who deserve better than what they've been given." His gaze rested on Lara, which is why Lara Connor will serve as head of vehicle and parts procurement, effective immediately. She has the skill, the grit, and the backbone this company needs. Lara blinked, stunned. Her cast itched, her body ached, but in that moment she felt taller than she ever had. The crew looked at her with new eyes, no longer the girl Chuck mocked, but the woman chosen to lead. Weeks later, Lara stood at the Detroit Auto Show, her badge gleaming against her jacket. She walked past rows of polished engines, chrome shining beneath showroom lights. Reporters asked questions, suppliers pitched contracts, racers admired specs, and Lara answered with the authority of someone who had fought for her place. She touched the edge of a custom engine display and let the roar of the crowd wash over her. Somewhere inside the noise, she heard the echo of her father's voice, the one who had first placed a wrench in her hand. "One day you'll run your own garage." She smiled. She hadn't just run one. She had helped save one. And in doing so, she had found something stronger than any engine she'd ever built: the unshakable worth of being seen, believed in, and trusted. Iron Ridge Auto's future was hers to shape. This story makes us reflect on how injustice can hide in plain sight, and how courage and quiet observation can change everything. What would you have done if you were in Lara's shoes? Comment below. And if this story moved you, give it a like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more powerful stories like this. See you in the next video.